It's a time of my life. I'm reaching a big number in my years this year. So it's really just about the feelings that I've had all through my life, because music's always been completely a part of me.
I don't support it in any way. I have no contact with the band that is now called Smokie. That is what Chris Norman talks about Smokie lately. At the time, Smokie was still at its peak. Songs like Living Next Door to Alice and If You Think You Know How to Love Me were playing across Europe. Millions of records had been sold, and Norman's raspy voice had become the band's defining sound. So when he left, many people did not understand why. Years later, Norman began speaking more openly about that period. He talked about the pressure of constant touring. He mentioned feeling creatively restricted. And he also shared clear opinions about Smokie today, a band that still performs under the name but no longer includes any original members. These statements reveal more than the story of a successful band. They show how Norman reflects on the past, the difficult choices he made, and the larger question of who truly owns Smokie's legacy. Early years and the formation of Smokie. When Chris Norman talks about the early days of Smokie, he often corrects a common assumption. Many people remember Smokie as a smooth pop band from the 1970s. Norman says the band originally sounded much heavier. In a 2010 interview, he described their early identity very clearly. In the early days, Smokie had an edge. We were a rock band. We were heavy and rocky on stage, heavy with good voices and good harmonies. His comment shows how he understood the band's original style. Smokie relied on vocal harmonies, but the performances were loud and energetic. On stage, they played like a rock band rather than a polished pop act. This approach helped them stand out during a time when British music was still heavily influenced by the wave that followed the Beatles. The group itself began in 1964. Norman formed the band with school friends, including Alan Silson and Terry Utley. In the beginning, they experimented with several different band names. One of the earliest was The Yen. Later, they started performing under the name Smokie. The spelling eventually changed to Smokie. The adjustment was made to avoid confusion with American soul singer Smokey Robinson. This small change later became part of the band's official identity. At that time, the group was still far from success. They spent years traveling across the United Kingdom, performing in small venues. These early experiences are something Norman often recalls when describing the formation of the band. In a 2024 interview, he explained what those years were like. We traveled up and down the country in a van, sleeping on rolled-up mattresses. We were like brothers. It was an adventure. We were young and hungry. We'd do anything to make it. The description is simple, but direct. The band drove their own van from town to town. Equipment filled most of the space. After performances, they slept wherever they could. Sometimes that meant using rolled-up mattresses inside the vehicle. This routine lasted for years. During that time, Smokie played in small clubs, pubs, and local halls throughout England. These performances rarely brought significant income, but they forced the band to improve quickly. Playing night after night helped them tighten their harmonies and build confidence on stage. The constant travel also created a strong bond between the members. Norman frequently describes the band during this period as a group of brothers rather than just colleagues. They shared the same vehicle, the same stage, and the same uncertain future. Looking back today, Norman often summarizes that entire period with one word: adventure. The band had little money and no guarantee of success. Yet the experience shaped the sound and character that later defined Smokie. Those years of travel, rehearsals, and small club performances built the foundation for everything that followed. Long before the international hits and large concert tours, Smokie was simply a young band moving from one town to another, trying to survive and improve with every show. The years of success and Smokie's peak by the mid-1970s. The long years of club performances finally began to produce results for Smokie. After signing and working with the songwriting and production team Nicky Chin and Mike Chapman, the band quickly entered a period of major commercial success. One of the first breakthrough singles was If You Think You Know How to Love Me, released in 1975. The song reached the UK Top 10 and introduced Smokie to a wider European audience. Soon after, more hits followed, including Living Next Door to Alice and Lay Back in the Arms of Someone. During later interviews and retrospective videos, Chris Norman often described this period as the moment when everything changed for the band. In a 2024 retrospective video discussing the group's history, he referred to the songs from that era as massive hits you will remember. The success quickly moved Smokie from small clubs to large concert halls. The band began touring internationally. They performed across Europe, Scandinavia, Australia, and other regions where their records sold strongly. Television appearances also increased. Smokie appeared more than 40 times on the British music program Top of the Pops, a sign of how often their singles entered the charts. Norman has often described the atmosphere of those years as exciting but intense. The band moved rapidly from recording sessions to television performances and then to international tours. The schedule was demanding, but it confirmed that Smokie had become one of the most recognizable pop rock groups of the decade. A major reason for this success was the distinctive sound built around Norman's voice. Many critics and music writers have pointed out that his rough, slightly smoky vocal tone became a defining feature of Smokie's recordings. In discussions of the band's legacy, writers frequently note that his raspy and emotional singing style helped create the group's recognizable identity. Norman himself has acknowledged that his voice played a central role in the band's sound. At the same time, he repeatedly emphasizes that Smokie was built on group harmony rather than a single performer. In earlier interviews, he often returned to the same description of the band's musical approach: strong voices combined with tight harmonies. This balance helped Smokie stand out during the 1970s. While many groups focused heavily on guitar sound or studio production, Smokie's songs relied on vocal layering and melodic structure. The result was a sound that blended elements of glam rock and soft rock. That mixture proved especially popular across continental Europe. As the hits continued, Smokie built a large international fan base. Their records sold millions of copies across Germany, Scandinavia, the Netherlands, and Australia. Concert promoters regularly booked the band for large venues. What began as a group traveling in a van across England had become a global touring act. Looking back today, Norman often describes that era as a period of intense energy. In retrospective interviews discussing his career, he has referred to the band's history as a story built on resilience, talent, and timeless music. The phrase reflects both pride and distance when he talks about Smokie's peak years. However, the same success that defined the band also created new pressures. The constant touring schedule left little time for rest. Recording expectations grew as record labels demanded more hits. Over time, these pressures began to influence Norman's thinking about his future. Even while Smokie continued to release successful songs, Norman gradually started considering the possibility of a different path. The excitement of the breakthrough years remained an important part of his memory, but it also marked the beginning of questions about creative freedom and personal direction. Decades later, when Norman reflects on Smokie's legacy during anniversary releases and commemorations, he often acknowledges both sides of that period. The success built the band's reputation and introduced their music to millions of listeners. At the same time, it set the stage for the major decision that would come in the mid-1980s, the moment when Norman chose to leave the band and pursue his own career. Leaving Smokie and the personal risk by the mid-1980s. Chris Norman had already spent more than 20 years with Smokie. The band continued touring and recording, but but Norman gradually began to question whether he wanted to continue the same path. Years later, he summarized that moment with a direct statement. "Leaving Smokie was one of the biggest risks I ever took, but sometimes you have to step into the unknown to find your own path." Norman officially left the band in 1986. Some sources have occasionally confused the timeline, suggesting an earlier departure, but Norman himself has clarified that he remained with Smokie until the mid-1980s before making the final decision. In interviews, he has explained that the choice was not driven by conflict with other members. Instead, the main issue was creative pressure. By that time, Smokie had spent years following the same routine, recording albums, promoting singles, and performing long international tours. The formula had worked commercially, but Norman began to feel restricted by it. He has described this period as a time when he felt creatively limited. The band's sound had become strongly associated with a particular style, and record labels expected that formula to continue. For Norman, that expectation gradually became difficult to accept. After more than 2 decades performing with the same group, he wanted the freedom to explore different musical directions. Leaving Smokie meant walking away from a secure career. The band still had a loyal audience and strong recognition across Europe. Norman understood that a solo career offered no guarantee of success. Despite that uncertainty, he chose to leave. The transition period that followed was not simple. Norman had to build a new identity outside the band that had defined his career for years. In later interviews, he often explained that artists cannot completely escape their past. In a conversation discussing his career reflections, he once noted that musicians must accept their history while still trying to create something new. Audiences often associate artists with their most famous work, and moving beyond that image requires patience. Norman's solo career soon produced an important breakthrough. In 1986, he released the song "Midnight Lady." The track became a major hit in several European countries and reached #1 in Germany. The success demonstrated that Norman could attract listeners even outside the Smokie identity. It also confirmed that his voice remained the central element that audiences recognized. In some interviews, Norman has compared this transition to the experiences of other artists who left successful groups. Musicians such as Paul McCartney or members of Bee Gees faced similar challenges when balancing past success with new artistic directions. Norman's reflections on this decision have remained consistent over time. He does not describe leaving Smokie as a rejection of the band's history. Instead, he frames it as a necessary step for personal growth. For him, the decision represents a lesson about risk. Success can create comfort, but it can also limit creativity. Choosing a new direction often requires stepping away from what already works. Even decades later, Norman occasionally returns to this theme in interviews and public statements. When discussing new projects, including recent releases such as Lifelines, he still describes the decision to leave Smokie as a turning point that shaped the rest of his career. Relationship with Smokie's past and live performances. Years after leaving Smokie, Chris Norman gradually developed a different perspective on the band's legacy. In the first years after his departure, he focused mainly on building his solo career. Over time, however, he began to openly acknowledge that Smokie would always remain a central part of his identity. In a 2010 interview, Norman explained this reality in simple terms. "Yeah, I mean, you can't get away from the past. There's a lot of old fans come and see me, and you can't just go away and say, 'I want to do something new.'" The statement reflects a practical understanding of how music careers work. Many fans first discovered Norman through Smokie's records during the 1970s. When they attend his concerts today, they often expect to hear at least some of the songs that made the band famous. Earlier in his solo career, Norman sometimes tried to distance himself from those songs. Over time, that attitude changed. Instead of avoiding the Smokie catalog, he began to include it in his performances. Today, His concerts usually follow a balanced structure. Norman mixes older Smokie songs with his solo material, as he has described it in interviews. The goal is simple: perform some old stuff and also perform some new stuff. This approach allows him to respect the expectations of longtime fans while still presenting his later work. For many audiences, the Smokie songs serve as a connection to the past. While the solo tracks show how Norman's music has evolved, Norman has also spoken about how performing these songs now feels different compared to earlier periods in the same 2010 discussion. He explained, "And now, when I do a tour, I actually enjoy doing the Smokie stuff. It makes people really happy." The comment shows how his relationship with that music has changed. At one time, those songs represented a period of pressure and constant touring. Today, they function more as a shared memory between the performer and the audience. When Norman performs songs such as "Living Next Door to Alice" or "If You Think You Know How to Love Me," the reaction from audiences often confirms that those recordings remain widely recognized decades later. The crowd response reinforces the lasting impact of the band's music. This connection between artist and audience has been visible in interviews for many years. In a 2004 video interview discussing his solo work and the album Junction 55, Norman explained that he had accepted the fact that Smokie's songs would always remain part of his concerts. Rather than resisting that expectation, he decided to treat those songs as part of his musical history. The shift reflects a broader sense of maturity in how he discusses his past. For Norman, Smokie's catalog now functions as a bridge between generations of listeners. Longtime fans attend concerts to hear the songs they remember from the 1970s. New listeners often discover his solo material through those same performances. In that way, the band's legacy continues to influence Norman's career even decades after his departure. Instead of separating the two periods completely, he now presents them as different chapters of the same musical journey. Views on the current version of Smokie. In recent years, Chris Norman has spoken more directly about the modern version of Smokie. His comments became more explicit after the death of bassist Terry Utley in 2021, who had been the last remaining member connected to the band's original era. After Utley's death, the group continued performing under the name Smokie with an entirely different lineup. Norman has made it clear that he does not support this situation. In a later interview, he addressed the issue directly. "I don't support it in any way. I have no contact with the band that is now called Smokie." The statement reflects a clear distance between Norman and the current band. According to his comments, he does not maintain communication with the musicians who now perform under the Smokie name. Norman has also explained why he finds the situation problematic. From his perspective, the identity of the band was built by the original members who created the recordings and the sound that audiences remember. When none of those original members remain, he believes the name can become misleading. In some interviews, he has described this situation as unfortunate but also common within the music industry. He noted that many groups continue touring under well-known names even when the entire original lineup has disappeared. According to Norman, this pattern reflects a commercial reality in which recognizable band names continue attracting audiences. However, his own position remains consistent. He does not criticize individual musicians who join later lineups, but he separates them from what he considers the authentic history of Smokie. Norman has emphasized that the band's real legacy belongs to the original lineup that recorded the classic songs and built the group's reputation during the 1970s. In discussions about Smokie's history, he often highlights the role played by the early members who shaped the band's sound. In retrospective videos and interviews reflecting on his career, Norman acknowledges that Smokie's music still continues to reach new audiences. Different singers now perform the songs, and the band's catalog remains active through concerts and recordings. At the same time, he draws a clear distinction between the continuing performances and the original creative period. For Norman, the legacy of Smokie is inseparable from the musicians who created the recordings that defined the band's identity.